Hi there. This screencast is going to be covering the types of instructional delivery models. I've divided them up into 6 different categories. It's a somewhat simplified list, I suppose, especially when it comes to the second item, but I think it covers the basics. First item on the list is traditional or face-to-face. Everyone's very familiar with that classroom instruction. The next is hybrid. It's more commonly in the literature called blended. At Morton College here, we call it hybrid, and this is where you have a mix of online and in-person or face-to-face activities. Next, you have online, which is, as it suggests, it's a course that would be 100% online. Remote refers to a kind of course where it's also online. It is not an on-campus or in a classroom, but it tends to follow the structure of a traditional or face-to-face class. It usually uses either live lecture or, via video conferencing. And there are there's a schedule that students have to meet, so it is via distance, but it's more closely related to face-to-face. Then you have convertible. This would probably be something like a hybrid where everything is ready to go online. The teacher may choose to start with face-to-face, but then if circumstances change, you can go to you're ready to go at any moment to an online mode. And obviously, this is something that has become more common because of the current circumstances. Finally, you have learner choice mixed model. This would be where you have classroom instruction that's happening, lecture or discussion, and at the same time you would maybe have cameras there where students remotely can be joining in, watching and listening to the lecture, and perhaps participating in any kind of discussion. And then materials would be presumably both on paper as traditional, handed out to students, but also online. So those are the 6 most simply stated. Those are the 6 possible models. And again, I'll point out that the hybrid model, especially, has all sorts of variations, how you mix and match the online versus face-to-face. And all of them, obviously, even with traditional face-to-face, there's all sorts of different ways to handle instruction. So this is a fairly simplified list here. So let's compare and contrast these. I've sort of identified some characteristics that we can use to compare and contrast. So created a grid here. On the left-hand side, you can see the 6 course delivery model types. And then at the top are the characteristics that we're looking at. First one is whether this model is site dependent or flexible, whether it is something that students have to go to a particular place for, and the faculty member, of course, or it can be handled from some other place, like at home. Next one has to do with synchronous versus asynchronous, and this is, of course, whether something is happening simultaneously. For example, a video conferenced lecture discussion where people are actually interacting in real time. Could also be a chat, doesn't need to have video or audio. And it could be purely audio as well, but whatever, it's synchronous. Asynchronous is where materials or tasks are given, but they do not need to be accomplished at that same time. They can be done later. Next category here is autonomy versus control, and this deals with, as it says, the autonomy. How much autonomy do the students have? The extreme would be that something is self-paced or even sort of self-directed, and then control means that the instructor is giving the content, the materials, but also controlling when things have to be done and setting deadlines and things, and controlling the order that things will happen. Finally, and this is in particular relevant for mixed models, you have the emphasis how much is face-to-face and how much is online. So we're going to start with this first category here, site-dependent versus site-flexible. Traditional face-to-face classrooms, single site, unless you have a classroom in a lab or something. But that's the usual thing. You go to a specific place at a specific time, and there you have your class. The hybrid would be mixed. You have class usually with a set schedule, whether it's 2 days a week in the classroom and 1 day a week online, or 1 week in the classroom and 1 week online, whatever it might be. That's usually set in advance to avoid confusion, so that people can set schedules, but it's mixed. Online, of course, is work from home, work from anywhere. You do not have to be in a particular place. The instructor may be tied to, if the instructor is doing something with a lab demonstration or something, or using some kind of technology that's on campus, the instructor might have to be on campus. Remote tends to be synchronous and tends to be, where you have people logging in at a particular time so that they can participate. So again, the instructor might have to be in a given spot for the technology, but the students would not. Convertible is very similar to hybrid, that you would start out on in the classroom, but then maybe you would switch to an online situation. And then finally, learner choice. This is where some students may be on campus in the classroom, and some students may be joining remotely. So this is, as you might imagine, it's the most work intensive probably for the instructor, because you're basically doing an in-person class and an online class simultaneously. So those are the considerations for site. Now we'll look at synchronous versus asynchronous. Traditional courses, of course, are mostly synchronous. You're in a room with people and things are happening at the same time. On the other hand, homework is an example of asynchronous work. I give a task today and tell people to finish it by Wednesday. So whether I give that task online or I give that task in person, the task itself is asynchronous. The hybrid, of course, that's mixed. At least the in-class part is going to be synchronous. There may also be synchronous things happening online, but it's definitely going to be a mixed model. Online also is often mixed. You can have synchronous, you can have chats and video conferencing and things, or it can be completely asynchronous, that materials are posted and discussions are held and so on, but everything is done asynchronously. And by the way, I've taken several courses with the Illinois Online Network, those courses. I have yet to have any synchronous experience with that. Everything they have done so far, and I haven't completed all of the classes, but I've done a number of them, and they've been all asynchronous, which I think maybe is not so great. Remote, again, is mostly synchronous. That is that it is kind of mimicking that in-person experience, but it's remotely, so that, again, the instructor is on the computer at a certain time doing a lecture and a discussion, and the students are also there at the same time. For the most part, that's what happens in remote. Convertible, it'll start in one mode and then possibly switch to the other. And then learner choice mixed model. It's going to be mixed, but also The idea is that because some of the students will be in the classroom, then it's going to have a fairly strong synchronous component to it. Next, we'll look at autonomy versus control. And I think in most of these, for the most part, as it says in all these, that usually content and sequence are highly controlled by the instructor, that the instructor determines what's going to happen and when. But as it says here, it depends on the program, so you may have some degree of autonomy. The online, that you do have the option of very close to full autonomy in the case of a self-paced plan, and even I suppose a course where things don't need to happen in particular sequence. I don't think that's very common, but I guess it's possible. And again, all the rest of these, usually content and sequence, are controlled by the instructor. Finally, we'll look at the mix of face-to-face versus online. Of course, in traditional, you're dominant face-to-face, but there's also a lot of web-enhanced courses, and a lot of instructors for a long time have been putting homework and supplementary materials and so on online. So that tends to, even in a traditional course, it can be kind of mixed. Hybrid, this is really defining the different models of hybrid, whether it is face-to-face dominant or online dominant, and they have all sorts of fancy names for these different models. But what it comes down to is how the face-to-face versus online is handled, and how it's distributed. Hybrid, as I said, it can be fairly varied as far as that emphasis goes. Online, of course, is 100% online. Remote is 100% online, with the caveat that it's synchronous. Convertible may shift from face-to-face to online, and then learner choice, of course, that's the students choose whether they want to be in person or online. So this is the whole table here. I will include a PDF of the table for you. And I should point out that these 4 items in this table, the 4 that we've been looking at, they're of course not the only points of comparison that we could use. We could make the same kind of a chart looking at advantages for instructors, disadvantages, and disadvantages for students. We could look at appropriateness for content areas or academic fields. You could look at advantages versus disadvantages for the institution. You could look at how assessment methods would vary between these. And that does become kind of an issue, especially for the all online models, how you assess things with integrity. So yeah, there's a lot of different categories that we could look at to compare and contrast. I wanted to mention a couple of other possible variations here that not only the models that we looked at there can occur, but also within the use of whatever component, whatever online component, whether it's mixed or full online, there's 3 different ways that this can play out as well. That it might be a unified or single platform that is all online instruction takes place on a single learning management system or course management system, for example, Blackboard. And there's a number of other platforms out there. The other choices are, you could have one that's coordinated and integrated, where everything is connected through, say, Blackboard, but you have other platforms, publisher sites, digital content, that students can click through, and very often they kind of leave the main platform and go to this other one, but they're still connected within the learning management system. Finally, you have this the possibility of this separate or fragmented where some of the things are being managed through Blackboard. Some of the things are maybe, you have things going on through Google Docs. You're meeting through Zoom or Skype and so on. And this specifically would be, the case where it's not integrated together. It's all treated separately. And, some instructors choose to do that. Pros and cons of these, well, if it's unified, then it's simplified. The learner, the student only has to learn one platform and how to navigate in one platform, and especially when that platform is being used by other teachers within the institution, when everyone's using the same learning management system. The downside of that would be maybe limitations on functionality. You're stuck with what you can do with that platform. Fortunately for us, Blackboard has very, very broad functionality. Unfortunately for us, it's often a bit unintuitive, mainly because it's been cobbled together over the years of different, from different platforms and applications and things that they have picked up along the way. But it is fairly comprehensive, so the limitations on functionality should not be significant. The other thing about Blackboard is that there are a lot of integrations available. If you're using other materials and other sites and platforms that are integrated and connected with Blackboard, then of course you have increased functionality, which is a good thing. And the other good thing is that it's also integrated. And particularly and importantly, I think grading is integrated, that you've got a central grade book that would be run through Blackboard. Downside might add complexity, confusion. I use, for example, Turnitin.com, and that does add a level of complication because, Turnitin is not going to mirror how Blackboard does everything. It functions sort of embedded in Blackboard, but it has its own foibles and particularities. So that does add a level of confusion, or certainly for the instructor, a level of having to explain things. Finally, with the separate, using separate platforms and content, the plus, you have increased functionality. There's a lot of diverse offerings, obviously, that you can be using. The downside is that it can add a lot of complexity, and it can lead to fragmentation, that it's, students have to be signing in different places. One of the things about using materials and platforms and so on that are integrated with Blackboard is you don't have to sign in separately. It's all integrated sign-in, whereas if you're using outside platforms, then students would have to have separate sign-in and usernames and so on. So those are three other possible considerations for especially the hybrid and online models. So there you have it. Going back to this overall table, again, I will provide a PDF of this for you for your information and for your files. And thanks for listening and watching.